So thank you for coming back to the series. What we're going to cover today is the second part of our registration setup. So in the previous one, we dealt with making sure that the groups are correct. So when we come through to the registration configuration status here, you'll see that because I'd fixed two, only 3 of the 5 didn't have groups. So that's just so you can see that those changes were made. But again, we're going to start from the home page, and to go back into our registration setup for our given qualification was qualifications. Then we select configure for that particular one, and now we're going to look at its registration setup. Okay, so we dealt with groups. The next thing we're going to need to deal with is settings. Okay. So for this particular learning program, we aren't going to enable all of these, but just so that you understand them, we're going to go to, once we've selected edit on the settings, you can now see an update registration settings model. On that model, the first one is allow online registrations. What this means is allow an applicant who then becomes a student to do their own registration, their own first registration online. So if you check it, it means yes. If you leave it deselected or unchecked, it will be no. First time registrants, this is the second one. First time registrants must choose all required and elective modules, yes or no. That means that the system by default will select all available modules, whether they be elective and required. Only allow registration into groups named unallocated. What this is if, for instance, you did not have, you want to manage groups after the fact, and you don't want them to select the group they want to go into, you can check this and the system will create a group called unallocated, and then from that group you can then move the students between groups. So that's an option there. Then it says only allow registration into groups with a start and end date that matches the intake enrollment date. So if you had a number of groups, but for that intake you want to use a smart lookup function, we have a function where the system will look for groups that match the enrollment date and only display those. So the enrollment date for the intake. So for example, the intake that we have that has May, if we selected that, only the May group will display, even though the January one is available within the date range that we set. So that's just an option there. Then if payment terms are specified, proof of payment upload required. This is an option if you needed to collect proof of payments during the registration process. If payment term selected, payment term selection required, that means that if we specify a payment term, they have to select a payment term. That's an option that can be enabled as well. I'm not going to enable any of these. That's just a thing that says that the system will store the payment option that they had, so that when it goes through to the review step, a staff member can see, oh, this person chose to do easy terms or do a full payment. So that's what that is for. So we're not going to enable any of those. We just want staff to be able to play with it. So that was settings. So now we're going to look at costs. Right, so we've dealt with all the settings. Now we're going to look at registration costs. Now, because our registration sits towards the end, it only deals with tuition costs, and these costs come from the curriculum. So I'm going to click on the curriculum, and you'll see on our standard learning path I've made each of these things cost 10 units. So if you had to register for all of these, it would cost you 50 of these units. So in our registration setup, when we click on costs, we can now add a payment option. So we can say that we'll call this 10% deposit. And there won't be a discount, but the deposit's going to be 10%. And then they'll be able to pay it off over the next 5 months. And it's due the first day of each month. Okay, so you can save that. And so they have an option for that. They can then add no deposit. Right, and they must then, if there's no deposit, they have to pay it over 3 months, due the first day of every month. Okay. And if they pay for this program between if they pay between now, so let's say December, because they can apply and then get their registration done. So from December up until the end of February, they will get a 5% early bird discount. So we're going to give them, let's just make it 5.5. Okay, so now we've set up the costs. So what will happen is when they get to the payments page, whether it's the staff member or the student, they'll then see these different discount offerings. Automatically, if it falls within this date range, they'll qualify for this discount. And also they can then choose which payment option they want to use. I click delete there to remove it. I don't want to remove it. So now, because all of that is set up, we can now look at the wizard. So remember that the last time we used the language of a wizard was during applications. So a wizard has a number of steps. So this is similar to the other wizard, just that you can't choose what sections will happen. The stuff that we've brought down to here is the ability to send an email on completion of the step. So if someone starts the wizard, you can then say what would be good? Let's just say we can say maybe it would be better if we, the example I'm going to use is we're going to say to this particular learner, I'm going to say, hi, okay. Thank you. Selecting the message you want to study. Please note that in the next step you will be required to upload a proof of payment in line with your selected payment option. As a reminder, our banking details are as follows. So we have that, and then right. Okay, so once the learner has selected their modules, maybe we don't want to notify anybody, but on the step where they select their payment options, maybe then we want someone to be notified. So what we'll do is, because you need somebody to come in and know that a learner has completed stuff, so we're just going to have this registrations person notified, and then we need someone to be notified that payment has been verified by a staff member. They can now come in and finalize a student, and if you wanted to, you could then have students notified that their registration has been finalized. Okay, so that's how you can use the wizard here, so things will be triggered for them to get a message throughout the process. Quite similar to applications. There's fewer things that you can change because it's just selecting modules, paying for the modules you've selected, or uploading proof of payment, and then the registration gets finalized by staff. Please know that if you allow online registrations, they can only go up to the payment step, because obviously payment confirmation has to happen internally through finance or whichever division is responsible for that. Okay, so that is everything in terms of registrations. Setup, just so that you are aware, under qualifications and then registrations, because the steps are static, which means you can't change them like you would for applications, during a certain period that you select for a given learning program or qualification, you can actually see where everybody is in the registration process. As you can see, 2 learners here have been finalized in this particular learning program. So that is just for you to be aware that that's how it works. Okay. Thank you again. I hope you will join us in our upcoming video series. This was just part of the initial setup. So this is the main structure. And once you've done this, you can then go into permissions, access, and that for staff. You can now add students, and they'll all be appropriately placed. So it's always best to do this part of the setup, and then we'll go into, in our next video, we'll go into granting access to staff at the system level, and then giving them access at the module level. Thank you again for following the series. Hope you will join us for our next one.